Next, from Springfield, we talk to Representative Will Davis and get his reaction to the passage of the stopgap budget. This runs about 13 minutes.
Representative Will Davis, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel as we just had the vote on the bill that will now fund education, K through 12 for the whole year, and government operations through, the end of the year, I guess, until the effective end date is what, January 1st? I mean, it stops on...
I guess technically that's the end date, but we gave a lot of discretion to the spending agencies, universities, state agencies, to look back into the current fiscal year, which is 16, and maybe there's some items they want to pay from 16, and then to continue on into 17. So it's not a true 18-month budget, but it allows for, again, some back spending into the current fiscal year that ends on the 30th of June, but it also allows for then moving forward spending into the new fiscal year, which starts July 1.
During the debate, you had caused some consternation on the floor by, well, first of all, maybe we should back up and say there were different versions of the bill that were coming out. Yes. And there was one version that was introduced, and I believe it would have had, what, $10 million? What would have it had that was then stripped from the bill?
Well, the amendment would have provided, well, it would have prioritized spending for essentially 4 different programs that are important to the legislative Black Caucus. One is diversifying education, higher education in Illinois program, which helps to create a pipeline for minority teachers that can then be hired at schools here in the state of Illinois. It would have also funded bridge programs, so this money would have gone to community colleges to help students of color who are making their transitions from community college to four-year institutions. It would have also provided resources for a program called Grow Your Own Teachers, which is kind of an alternative teacher education program, but allows non-traditional students to be able to go back to school and start to get the necessary credentials to ultimately become teachers, as well as minority teacher scholarships.
And as I understand this, what happened is there was an agreement. Yesterday was a long, prolonged meeting with the leaders, and they basically came to an agreement on paper, or in principle, I should say, and that is ultimately what came up. Now, there was one version between that agreement of yesterday and today where the items you just mentioned, and I think it would have been funded, what, $10 million worth of those?
The funding level would have been $10 million. Well, mind you, this wasn't new funding. I mean, there are lump sum dollars that are automatically going to the Board of Higher Education, the Illinois Community College Board, as well as the State Board of Education. These dollars could have been used to help fund these programs, but the challenge would have been prioritizing those programs. And so the amendment, while it's pointed out those programs specifically, was merely to say, we want you to prioritize the spending for these programs. So it wouldn't have been any new money. I think the governor's office...
So it's not $10 additional. It would have just said, of the monies that are available, we want you to prioritize them for the programs we already discussed.
For the programs. I think the governor's office even characterized it and said that if we do this, then that $10 million is coming out of human services. Well, again, that would have been a false statement, because at the end of the day, like we've done in the past when we've passed spending plans, this is merely a spending plan. And now you have to find the revenue to come behind that. So it wouldn't have taken any more money out of higher ed. It didn't increase necessarily the dollars that were being made available to support this spending plan. It would have basically said, you need to prioritize your spending, and here are some areas that we would like to prioritize that spending. So it didn't do anything the way it was characterized, but yes, was it brought in after the discussion, after the quote-unquote handshake, I think as one of the representatives characterized it? Yeah, that would have been the case. But nevertheless, if you dug down into it, again, it didn't cost, if you will, any additional dollars, nor did it take any money away from another spending area.
And so with that in mind, then you took to the floor. And one of the comments that riled the Republicans, as I would characterize it, more or less, said to Leader Durkin that he didn't care as much about minority communities, I guess, as you did, which is a subjective judgment, which I suppose depends on your perspective. But I suppose the question I would frame is, some people would say, Will, you're a gentleman, you're not a bomb thrower. Why would you point out one member on the House floor and say that? I mean, why did you do that? Was that a spontaneous thing, or did you feel that Representative Durkin had specifically been responsible for having this stripped out of it?
Well, the way Representative Durkin's name came up in the conversation is that, again, as the amendment was being tossed around, so to speak, and ultimately it was removed from consideration, there was applause from the Republican side of the aisle. And I took that to mean that, wow, great, we don't have to deal with these minority programs anymore. And that's the way that I couched comments. And so it wasn't specific to him, but he's the one that then, when I talked about what their reaction was in terms of the applause, he nodded his head in agreement as if, yeah, we did applaud that. So that's where it came specific to him, because of his reaction to my statement. Now, for obvious reasons, I'm going to care more about African American communities than him. And that's not to say that African Americans don't live in his district. But when you take a step back and look at this entire process, when the Black Caucus in particular has been advocating for programs, particularly in human service, that help support African Americans, where were the Republicans? They stood with the governor in terms of the budget that he presented, where programs like that were either reduced, so significantly reduced, or eliminated. So I'm looking at that history. So it's not just about this one moment in time. There are several moments in time where when Leader Durkin would talk about supporting the governor's budget, he in essence is supporting the reduction in spending on programs that are important to the Black Caucus, to minorities throughout the entire state of Illinois. So again, he can look at it in terms of one item or that moment in time, but I'm looking at the complete history of it, and that's what the history of it has shown. When we were in those working group meetings, and as an appropriations chair, I was able to participate in those, the governor's stopgap budget, the one that he presented, shows a lot of zeros in line items that are specific to African Americans. So again, this is their budget. So I don't have any reason to think that they necessarily think that those items are priorities. If they did, then there would at least been some level of spending in them. Now, maybe I would have wanted more, but at least I can say he's interested, because there would have been some dollars spent there and not zeros. So that's the context that maybe Durkin doesn't understand, because I get it, he's a leader and he's not in those working groups, but I'm in those working groups. I'm looking at those documents, and that's what those documents tell me.
And I'll say for the viewers that sometimes they look at the legislature as a body of the whole. I mean, they just look at it as a group. I would argue to really have a good understanding of the way at least the House of Representatives certainly works, not as well as the Senate, but maybe to a lesser extent. Every member, you being one, is an advocate, almost like a lawyer representing a client. You're here to represent as an advocate for the people that you represent. Right. You're their voice. Right. And it would stand to reason that you go to bat for them. And if your people are having, coming out on the short end of some budgetary item, then obviously you're going to raise that as an issue and flag it. And that, I would say, that's true, to be expected by any member, right? I mean, if you're not getting your library or whatever it is you were urging or pushing for, then you're going to not take that in a happy form, and I suppose you shouldn't be, or you wouldn't be a good advocate.
And it's interesting, how people respond to things, because again, I talked about not prioritizing issues in the minority community, and Leader Durkin apparently took offense to my characterization, and that's fine.
Well, I think it maybe was misunderstood, but as if you were almost accusing him of being insensitive to the needs of the minority community, or that he took it as a personal insult.
Well, he's really not advocating for it. Again, when I look at some of those line items and I see zeros there, all I can say is that if he supported what the governor presented, then he in essence supporting reductions or elimination of programs that are specific to the minority community. But essentially the point that I was trying to make was, again, he took offense to my characterization of that, at him. But when you talk about the things that members say, we had a member from his side of the aisle make a very disparaging comment about women, who are on birth control or who utilize birth control. I don't believe he stood up and said my member shouldn't have said that, or that was wrong to say. So again, if he's about just making sure that those comments that are being made that are appropriate, or if they're inappropriate, then he should be willing to stand up for anything that's said or being done that's inappropriate. Just the same manner that no reason why he can't be an advocate for programs for African American communities, just like I'm an advocate for programs that support everyone in the state of Illinois.
So let's just wrap. And basically, where do we go from here? We put a Band-Aid on this. We didn't really solve the problem. When we come back in January, we're going to be out of money. The schools will be funded, but other items will need to be passed. You'll be past the election. What happens then? Are we going to have a repeat of the standoff, or do you think that this portends greater cooperation going forward?
Well, I think many members would say this is what we can do when we cooperate, but there are still some serious looming items out there. In those budget working groups, this stopgap measure was supposedly taking the dollars that we have available to try to fund government. But in the broader context, when we talked about a full-year budget, there was a conversation about the need for additional revenue. So again, we still have yet to have that conversation, the need for revenue to help continue to fund the things that we want to fund. Again, this stopgap requires us to come back together because, again, we call it an 18-month budget, but truly it's not a real 18-month budget. I mean, literally, universities and other agencies could run out of dollars come November.
Well, and some of this is funding like backlog. In other words, filling in the bills we ran up by not having a budget previous.
Absolutely. So we can't look at this as a true 18-month budget. So who knows, there may be a need to come back even before veto session or before the election to try to address some of these concerns as well. So, and the fact that, again, we're still just talking about only essentially a half a year in the new fiscal year. So we know we've got to come back. Should we wait till January to come back? Probably not. I mean, veto session presents an opportunity, when we will be back here for those purposes, but also since we are here, we can engage in those conversations at that time. We don't have to wait to January to start talking about what we do for the next 6 months of the fiscal year. Those conversations can start. They could start immediately, but I know there will be some time, but they are in earnest could start in November during veto session.
All right. Representative Will Davis, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much.